Today, Congress will establish a new high water mark for digital asset policy. To be clear, this joint effort between the Financial Services Committee and the Agriculture Committee did not come together overnight, far from it. We've formed subcommittees, convened working groups, heard from countless stakeholders, and received input from members across the ideological spectrum in the House of Representatives. Last July, we passed the Bipartisan Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act, FIT 21, out of our respective committees. Each step in this process has created a new high water mark. The next step will be a broad bipartisan vote today to finally provide the robust consumer protections and clear regulatory framework established by this bill. FIT 21 will cement the United States' global leadership in technological innovation, invention, and adoption. Unfortunately, our current regulatory framework is preventing digital assets innovation from reaching its full potential. The SEC and the CFTC are currently in a food fight for control of these asset classes. They've created an impossible situation where the same firms are subject to competing and contradictory enforcement actions by the two different agencies, leaving consumers behind, leaving innovators behind. FIT 21 fixes this by creating a regulatory framework that will provide clear rules of the road and strong guardrails for the Americans engaging with the digital asset ecosystem. At its core, FIT 21 applies time-tested consumer protections to ensure the 20% of Americans who engage in the digital asset ecosystem can do so safely, and so more Americans can engage as well. Today, we have the opportunity to answer the calls of consumers, digital asset innovators, and the Biden administration. We can establish the next high watermark for digital assets here in the United States. I urge my colleagues to support consumer protection, innovation, and American leadership by voting for FIT 21. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I yield myself such time as I may consume. I yield to myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 4763, which I am calling Not Fit for Purpose Act. This bill would deregulate a substantial portion of the crypto industry, taking them out of the purview of the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, and allowing them to operate either under a lighter touch regulatory regime, under the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or in what I have called a regulatory no man's land, with no primary regulator and virtually no regulations. For crypto, that would remain under the SEC's purview. This bill still provides major exemptions from critical securities laws. And if this wasn't bad enough, this bill is not just about crypto. Language was added to the bill after it was marked up by the committees of jurisdiction that would allow even some traditional securities to also exist in this regulatory no man's land. Specifically, I'm referring to Title II of the bill that defines the term investment contract asset. Assets that fall under this definition are explicitly deemed not to be securities and therefore not under the SEC's purview. But the bill doesn't provide an alternative legal framework for these assets. This represents an extreme MAGA libertarian approach where companies can operate without regulatory scrutiny and consumers and investors are on their own in detecting and avoiding fraudulent schemes. While Republican defenders of this bill have argued that this definition of investment contract asset is limited to digital assets under the bill, this is disputed by legal experts and SEC Chair Gary Gensler himself, who confirmed in a recent statement regarding this bill that it would have a broader impact on traditional securities. Interestingly, I don't hear any arguments from the Republicans at the Rules Committee hearing disputing that this would in fact be a regulatory no man's land, even if they insist it's just for crypto. Even for crypto, that would be transferred over to the CFTC. I have serious concerns about the loss of protections for consumers and investors. The CFTC is generally designed to deal with sophisticated institutional investors and traders. It doesn't have the same kind of protections that the SEC has for retail investors and consumers. Under all three avenues provided for crypto under this bill, the CFTC's lighter touch regulatory regime, SEC's weaker regulatory regime for restricted digital assets, or the regulatory no man's land. These are just a few examples of protections that would be stripped away. The right of an investor to sue, gone. Protections against conflicts of interest, gone. The right to critical disclosures that help investors make informed choices, gone. Enforcement by states against fraud and enforcement by the SEC for all of the above protections, including anti-fraud. H.R. 4763 would also upend more than 170 enforcement cases the SEC has brought related to crypto violations. These actions have been brought by both Democratic and Republican administrations to protect investors against crypto bad actors. The SEC is the federal agency on the front lines of enforcing our existing securities laws on crypto firms that have willfully chosen to ignore the law and defrauded consumers out of billions of dollars with these get-rich-quick schemes. Given this industry a free pass to avoid most all regulations cannot be the answer to the serious concerns that members have raised about crypto fraud. I've seen many efforts by Republicans acting at the behest of the industry to pass deregulatory regulation, but this is perhaps the worst, most harmful proposal I have seen in a long time. This bill would deregulate crypto and certain traditional securities to the extent that I and other experts have expressed serious concerns about this bill, causing a potential market crash and recession. I'm also reminded of how, over the warnings of regulators, Congress moved to deregulate of the over-the-counter derivatives. Remember the derivatives market back in 2000? The resultant financial crisis triggered the implosion of financial institutions, a wave of foreclosures, and trillions of dollars in lost wealth. And so I urge my colleagues, don't forget, you should not repeat the history with this bill. I want to highlight that the Biden administration has released a statement of administration policy opposing this bill. The bill is also opposed by a long list of investors and consumer advocates, state securities administrators concerned about state preemption, labor organizations worried about the retirement funds of their members, environmentalist groups concerned about the undisclosed risk of crypto mining, civic organizations worried about the undue influence of financial and crypto industry over Congress's actions, academics, legal experts, and technologists. So I urge my colleagues to stand up. Don't be afraid of big crypto. Stand up for everyday investors and consumers. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I now yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the chair of the Agriculture Committee and partner in FIT 21, Glenn Thompson.
The gentleman is recognized.
Well, I thank the chairman and thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 4763, the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act, or FIT 21, which establishes a regulatory framework for digital assets while protecting consumers and fostering innovation within the United States. This legislation has been a long time coming. Since 2018, the House Committee on Agriculture has held numerous hearings, roundtables, and meetings, and introduced multiple pieces of legislation to bring certainty and clarity to the digital asset markets. For Congress to establish a comprehensive digital assets market framework, it was clear the House Committee on Agriculture and the House Committee on Financial Services needed to work in a collaborative manner. Chairman McHenry and I first met nearly 2 years ago to discuss this ambitious plan, and together we aim to develop the best policies possible. Over this Congress, members of both committees have engaged in robust and collaborative debates and educational sessions on current securities and commodities laws and regulations, as well as gaining a deeper understanding of the digital asset ecosystem. Through this process, we learned several key points, including the current process to determine if a digital asset is a security or not is unclear, unworkable, and impractical. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission lacks essential regulatory authority over retailing intermediaries in the digital commodity spot market. The treatment of customer assets held by intermediaries needs to be strengthened. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have claimed this bill will allow a substantial portion of crypto and some traditional securities to escape nearly all laws and regulations operating without any primary regulator. That is far from the truth. The legislation before us today enhances existing securities and commodities regulations to create an appropriate framework for digital assets. For example, a registered digital commodity exchange would follow regulations similar to those of the CFTC for derivatives exchanges, including monitoring trading activity, prohibiting abusive practices, reporting trading information, managing conflicts of interest, ensuring governance standards, upholding cybersecurity, and more. Mr. Speaker, Congress has a historic opportunity to enact legislation that not only protects consumers, but also ensures that the United States remains at the forefront of technical innovation. By supporting FIT 21, we can create a safer, more transparent, and more competitive environment for digital assets. Let us seize this moment to provide clear guidelines and robust protections, fostering a future where innovation can thrive responsibly within our borders. And I certainly urging all my colleagues to support this bill. Mr. Speaker, I understand that the gentlelady from Washington State, the chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, has a few questions for clarification. And I yield to the gentlelady for questions.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. I rise in support of H.R. 4763. Blockchains are new foundational technology which will reshape our daily lives. Through innovative design approaches, blockchains can be used in all kinds of applications like tracking products through supply chains or facilitating the tokenization of financial assets. Unfortunately, many American innovators are being pushed abroad by overzealous regulators. According to a report by Electric Capital, the U.S. share of blockchain developers has declined from 40% in 2017 to 29% in 2022. So I'm excited about this legislation, providing clear rules of the road. This is a clear complement to some of the work that we've been doing in ENC to ensure American leadership in blockchain technology. I just would like to clarify some of the non-financial applications and uses that may be unintentionally captured by the bill.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Appreciate the time. So based on conversations I've had, it's my understanding that the intent of this bill is to ensure that the current authority over certain restricted digital asset transactions remains with the SEC and that the CFTC would only be authorized to regulate certain intermediaries in spot digital commodity markets. Is this correct?
If your understanding of the legislation is correct, the intent of FIT 21 is to draw jurisdictional lines between the SEC and the CFTC as it relates to certain spot digital asset transactions.
Thank you. Can you clarify your intent when it comes to exclusive jurisdiction of the CFTC and how this would impact the current protections for Americans against fraud and market manipulation?
Now, FIT 21 provides the CFTC with exclusive jurisdiction over digital commodity spot market transactions which occur on or through entities that are registered with CFTC. FIT 21 does not provide CFTC with the authority to directly regulate any transaction between two people which is not intermediated by an entity registered with the CFTC. Separate from FIT 21, CFTC has existing authority to police spot market commodities for fraud and market manipulation, which FIT 21 does not change.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Thompson, Chairman McHenry, and Representative Hill for the clarification. All your work. I yield back.
My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, who is also the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Digital Assets, Financial Technology, and Inclusion.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the gentlelady for yielding me this time. Mr. Chairman, I've been a member of Congress for over 20 years, and I just want to say that this is probably one of the worst. It may not be the worst, but it's in the top 3 in terms of the worst bills that I have seen actually progress to the floor of the House. Anybody who is excited about this bill either has not read it or does not understand it. This bill is a radical rewrite of the securities laws in this country. As most people who know our history realize that in 1929, when the markets crashed, we established the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934, shortly after the crash. And what that did is it created an agency that became the cop on the beat in financial services. They became the protectors of investors. And since that time in 1934, as courts have interpreted that law that is protecting investors, we've built up a body of case law that now makes the United States financial markets the most robust, and they become the marvel of the world. Everyone comes to the United States for investment because they know that their investment is protected and they will be treated fairly in the courts because we have well-defined laws. Well, this bill undoes all of that. This bill is a radical rewriting of the securities laws since 1934. It redefines what a security is. It allows financial companies to escape the cop on the beat. So now they can leave the jurisdiction of the SEC and go over to the CFTC, which has a fraction of, it's about 6 times as small as the SEC. So what will happen here is you'll see a migration of companies going out from under the SEC jurisdiction over to the CFTC, and this will cause havoc in our financial markets eventually. The one amendment I would have liked to see on this bill is that any company that becomes insolvent because of their involvement with crypto cannot receive a taxpayer bailout, because that's where this bill is heading. This is going to cause infirmity in the financial institutions in this country as they get commingled with crypto, and eventually we will be forced to be put in a situation where we're going to have to bail some of these banks out because of their involvement in crypto. This is a very bad bill, and I urge my colleagues to vote against it. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I now recognize the chairman of the Digital Asset Subcommittee on Financial Services, who's shepherded this bill along very well. The gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Hill. 2 minutes.
For what amount of time is the gentleman recognized?
I thank the chairman. This is, for those watching at home, it's like the tale of two cities, where one side is offering a work of fiction and the other side working a term of nonfiction. And I think over here, those that support this bill are supporting exactly the opposite of what I've heard on the other side of the aisle. You know, since last January, our two committees, Agriculture and Financial Services, have collaborated to make sure that we protect consumers and investors and the digital marketplace by preventing fraud, manipulation, front-running, other abusive practices, applying Bank Secrecy Act, AML requirements, and Know Your Customer rules, mitigating conflicts of interest, requiring firms to hold capital, segregate customer funds, have the right kind of custody policy, have registration for exchanges, dealers, and brokers who are working in digital assets, imposing reporting and bookkeeping requirements, building on the existing exemption regime for the offer and sale of digital securities to include robust disclosures to anyone considering a purchase. With that said, we hear a lot about the lack of legal clarity for the treatment of digital assets, which was the impetus for this legislation. But what does that even mean? Mr. Speaker, on this day, the SEC and the CFTC still contradict each other in court about whether a digital asset like Ethereum should be treated as a security or a commodity. Both cannot be true. When two federal agencies in the same administration cannot agree on the law, it should be up to Congress. And that's what the regulatory clarity that this bill, the FIT21 Act, will bring. In fact, I would argue, Mr. Speaker, that FIT21 is responsive to President Biden's own executive order and the Financial Stability Oversight Council report calling on Congress to enact a framework for digital assets that are not securities, and that's what we've done. I'm also proud that this measure is the product of committee work done through regular order and through good faith bipartisan efforts. All members should support this bill. I encourage a full yes vote from both sides of the aisle, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Good work, French. That was good.
I now yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've heard several times that this legislation is better than the status quo. There's a whole lot of reasons that's not true, but I want to focus specifically on this bill's utter failure to address the use of cryptocurrency by terrorists, foreign adversaries, and criminals. By the way, those issues, Treasury asked us specifically to address these issues with a whole bunch of reasonable changes. We introduced amendments. Every one of those amendments was rejected. The anti-money laundering provisions that are in this bill simply duplicate existing requirements. And yet, as the bill's supporters have actually argued, and Treasury has agreed, that the status quo is not sufficient to address the challenges created by cryptocurrencies. How do we know that cryptocurrencies are a problem for money laundering? Because the bad guys love crypto. Let's give you some examples. North Korean hackers have stolen $3 billion in cryptocurrency since 2017. White House national security officials have said last year that crypto theft and cybercrime have funded half of North Korea's nuclear program. Russia and Venezuela are both using crypto to evade U.S. sanctions. Venezuela recently said that because of the bite of sanctions, they are now moving to accept payments in crypto because that allows them to get money that we in Washington cannot track. Treasury Department's reviewing more than $20 billion of cryptocurrency that was laundered through a Russian-based cryptocurrency exchange. The Treasury Department has noted that Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda are all using crypto to finance terrorist attacks generally. Crypto is the preferred means of payment for fentanyl trafficking. Chinese businesses that sell fentanyl chemical ingredients to Mexican cartels have accepted millions in crypto payments. They've sold enough ingredients to make more than $54 billion worth of fentanyl pills. That's enough to kill 8.6 billion people if you're counting. Blockchain analysis firm Chainalytics said in January, and I quote, "Virtual currency is the dominant choice for buyers and sellers of child sexual abuse content." FinCEN basically said the same thing, said perpetrators of online child sexual exploitation are increasingly using convertible virtual currency to avoid detection. I could go on and on. These are not cherry-picked statistics. These are statistics from U.S. officials and from crypto firms, people who are entrusted with protecting our national security and care about this stuff. The Treasury Department asked for new rules to protect this. Every single one of those proposals was objected to either in the Financial Services Committee, the Ag Committee, or in the Rules Committee. If that was all this bill did, that would be one thing. But in fact, this bill goes out of its way to make it weaker by basically saying that anybody who uses unhosted wallets, decentralized or DeFi services is exempted from regulation, ignoring recommendations from both the Trump and Biden administration. Now, my Republican colleagues will boast that in this rule there's specific language that says that brokers and dealers are required to comply with anti-money laundering requirements. They're already required to do that. This bill does nothing to address that. It's exactly the same. You're going to brag about saying it's now illegal to speed. What we should have done, we should have made provisions to ban anonymous actors, to prevent you from saying, I want to move crypto from my account to yours, and I'm going to move it through an anonymous party so you can't tell what a bad guy I am. It should have banned people from using digital asset mixers that allow you to take a whole bunch of people, combine all their money together, and then give you something where you can't trace it through. If you want to understand how crazy this is, I would encourage you to go to your bank and try to deposit $10,000 in cash at your bank. Your bank will tell you, you have to tell me where that money came from. I'm going to take you back behind the counter. We're going to have to take your picture. We're going to have to get fingerprints because I do not like money laundering and I am obliged to protect it. By comparison, if you want to move $1 million of crypto from one person's account to another, send it through these mixers, send it through these anonymizers, you can do it. Do I have a little bit more time?
I yield to the gentleman an additional half minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
So we've got all these mixers that are used. Why were they not included in there? I don't know. I know why the crypto industry doesn't want them included in there, because they are profiting from people who are using these illicit services. The largest cryptocurrency exchange that stands to benefit from this regime helped to finance a legal challenge to the Treasury Department's case against Tornado Cash, which was the largest asset mixer in the world. This is a bad bill. It fails to address known problems. What it does do, however, is make the United States safer for drug traffickers, for terrorist funders, for child and drug traffickers, and for those who buy and sell child pornography. I did not know those groups had such advocates in Congress, but I am proud to oppose them and encourage all my colleagues to do the same. I yield back.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I now yield 2 minutes from the gentleman from South Dakota, my good friend, Mr. Johnson, the chair of the Digital Asset Commodities Rural Development Subcommittee on the Agriculture Committee.
Gentleman is recognized.
Here in Congress, we're supposed to be in the problem-solving business, and my oh my, do we have problems in the digital asset space. In recent years, we have seen the FTX debacle, a debacle that happened under the regulatory regime that some members apparently are so enamored with, a regime that does not work today. We have seen chronic and disruptive overreach by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And we have seen innovation and investment flow overseas. Mr. Speaker, they seek markets that are more predictable. We are the only G7 country that hasn't figured this out yet. And so clearly we have problems. I would submit that FIT 21 is the solution. We, for more than a year, French Hill and I, working with Chairs McHenry and Thompson and members on both sides of the aisle, have worked hard to together craft a solution that increases regulatory predictability, that increases consumer protection, and that will foster innovation. I know that success has many fathers and mothers, and so I do want to thank Mrs. McHenry and Thompson, Hill, Emmer, Davidson on the Republican side. But I do need to especially recognize my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle, particularly Mr. Nickel and Ms. Caravello, who have invested countless hours in getting this bill right. They have been joined by Himes, Crockett, Torres, Soto, Gottheimer, Davis. This bill, this success, would not be possible without their good faith efforts, and I thank them. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker and members, it is no mystery why the crypto industry prefers to be regulated by the CFTC rather than the SEC. Let's start with the substantial differences in funding and staff for the CFTC compared to SEC. In 2023, the CFTC employed roughly 680 full-time employees with an annual budget of $365 million, while the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, employed over 4,500 and had a budget of over $2 billion. Even with the limited funding provided to the CFTC under this bill, which is capped at $40 million and set to expire after 4 years, the CFT's funding would be only 1/5 of the SEC's budget. $40 billion is not sufficient to oversee more than 16,000 cryptocurrency. Let's not forget that the same Republicans that are bringing this bill to the floor are the same ones that proposed cutting CFTC's budget last year. Moreover, the CFTC is designed to deal mostly with sophisticated institutional investors and traders rather than retail investors and consumers. Therefore, the CFTC does not have the same level of protections for retail investors and consumers. And so, Mr. Speaker and members, I would simply say that we should look at this example. The CFTC has no mandate like the SEC that requires entities to act in the best interest of the investors or to put their clients' interests first. This is just another reason why I am very concerned about the light touch regulatory regime under the CFTC. With that, I now yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, who is also the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Capital Markets.
Last week, we had Police Week. This week, the Republicans show us that they support crime in the suites. The effect of this bill short term will be to disempower the most effective investor protection crime investigation organization in the world, the SEC. But the long-term objective of the crypto billionaire bros is to create a new currency, and they've named it well. Cryptocurrency literally means hidden money. And if it ever becomes a currency, it means that we will not be able to enforce our tax laws except on wage earners. And we will not be able to enforce our laws against child traffickers, drug dealers, and those who violate our sanctions. Now, the crypto bros have a lot of money. They make money by literally making money. They spread it around all Washington. They had Sam Bankman-Fried do it. Now he's in jail. Others have stepped forward. They've got a PR campaign. The Lakers don't play at enforced tax laws arena. They don't play at an arena dedicated to law enforcement. They play at crypto.com arena. But in spite of all that money and power, 3/4 of Democrats voted no on this bill when it was before our committee. There are those who say they want clarity. We have the clarity. The SEC has jurisdiction. What they really want is a patina of regulation, as little regulation as possible, claim to be regulated. Now, this bill would be bad enough if we were dealing with the original statute. And I know a lot of my colleagues have had meetings in their offices and they were told about this bill weeks ago, months ago. Some are leaning toward voting for it because they don't know that they dropped a new title in the bill just a few weeks ago. What does that new title do? Does it prohibit secret wallets, self-custody wallets? No. Does it outlaw the mixers that have as their sole purpose to mix up law enforcement? No. What does this new title do? It defines an investment contract in a new way, designed to make this bill not just applicable to crypto, but it says our regular stocks and bonds can be put on blockchain and have no regulation from the SEC. It is a dagger at the $100 trillion capital markets that we have that finance our whole economy. It doesn't just say, well, you're moving from SEC's tough regulation to the CFTC's weak regulation. It allows crypto to get no regulation by defining themselves as an investment contract. So
this is a bill that will gut regulation of crypto and may gut regulation of all of our capital markets. But it goes beyond that. Its ultimate purpose is to move forward with this cryptocurrency project. Now, right now, crypto is not a currency. There are very few purchases of goods with crypto. You can't buy a sandwich. But if crypto becomes a currency, but the very few times, as Mr. Kasten pointed out, that crypto is used as a means of exchange, it's used by the worst criminals in the world. But if crypto does become a currency, then we will not be able to enforce our other laws. Now, we have to understand, every time a billionaire cheats on his taxes, a member of the Freedom Caucus earns his wings. The patriotic anarchists come forward and they say, we want a strong America and we want to destroy the power of the American government. You can't have it both ways. This is a bill that in the short term means no regulation for of crypto. Not just lighter regulation under the CFTC, but no regulation under their new title. It is a bill that could gut all securities regulation for the stocks and bonds that power the American economy. And then longer term, it creates a competitor to the US dollar, which has one advantage. It's right in the name: hidden money. Hide your money from the IRS, from our sanctions enforcers, from everyone involved in the US government. And then finally, crypto declares that it wants to partially displace the US dollar as a reserve currency. If it's successful in that,
Yield
it will
30 additional seconds.
The gentleman is recognized
You have
for 30
to understand
seconds.
how important it is. We, frankly, are not fiscally responsible in this House. We don't collect near as much taxes as we spend in benefits. We're able to do that without too much harm because of the role of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. We have fiscal policies that would make Argentina blush, but we're able to do it. The crypto bros see the incredible amount of money and power the U.S. government has by being the world's reserve currency, and they say no, they want to appropriate them from themselves. I yield back.
The gentlelady from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized. The gentleman from North Carolina has 19 and a half minutes remaining. The gentlewoman from California has 7.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I'd like to yield a minute and a half to my colleague and friend from North Carolina, Mr. Nickel, who's been a great leader on digital assets and pragmatic policy here in the House.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I rise in support of the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act, or FIT 21, which I'm proud to co-sponsor. This legislation is a product of hundreds and hundreds of hours of bipartisan collaboration, and I was proud to work with Chair McHenry, Digital Assets Subcommittee Chair Hill, and members of the House Financial Services Committee to get this bill on the floor. This is a big deal. We're currently relying on 90-year-old securities law written before the internet even existed, and Congress has never voted on a regulatory structure for crypto. Roughly 20% of Americans have invested, traded, or used crypto, so it's not going anywhere. Whether you love crypto or you hate it, you should support regulation, because the status quo just isn't working, and we can't wait for the next FTX to take action. It's clear there are regulatory gaps between the SEC and the CFTC. Right now, we are the global leader in financial services and technology in the United States. If we still want to hold this position in 50 years, then we need to pass FIT 21. Support for U.S. leadership in digital assets shouldn't be a partisan issue. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this legislation, and I'd like to enter into the record a letter of support from the Chamber of Progress outlining how FIT 21 lays out strong rules of the road, consumer protections, and supports innovation. Thank you. I'll yield back.
The gentleman's request is supported by General Leave. The gentleman from North
I now
Carolina
yield 4 minutes
reserves.
to the gentleman from
Gentlewoman
Illinois,
from
Mr. Foster,
California is
who is
recognized.
also the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Financial Institutions and Monetary Policy.
The gentleman is recognized. Madam from California, can you clarify how much time is yielded?
Yeah, Maxine.
Will the gentlewoman from California clarify the time yielded?
4 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized
Yes.
for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Waters, for yielding. I rise in opposition to this bill, and while I'm encouraged by the dialogue and collaboration that's taken place between the House Financial Services Committee and the House Ag Committee on this bill, I believe in the potential of distributed ledger technology. I'm in fact the co-chair of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, and perhaps the only member of Congress who's actually programmed a blockchain client. But this bill I cannot support in its current form. To that end, my office submitted 3 constructive clarifying amendments, none of which were made in order by the Rules Committee. This legislation contains several fatal flaws. First, this legislation largely shifts oversight of digital assets industry away from the Securities and Exchange Commission, which has a long track record of successfully protecting retail investors from abuse in the financial markets, towards the CFTC, which has traditionally overseen markets with significantly less retail participation. Secondly, it would create a safe harbor for wannabe pirates through a so-called intent to register that shields crypto firms from SEC investor protection rules before the agencies even have time to write the rules. Thirdly, the bill was not crafted through regular order. This version of the bill contains a new and dangerous title that was never considered by the Financial Services Committee, Title II, which would create a new class of, quote, investment in contract assets, unquote, which has the potential to undermine decades of legal precedent governing the securities laws and to create opportunities for regulatory arbitrage. Instead, it was airdropped in during closed-door negotiations and before it was materialized for a final vote today. That is not regular order. Finally, this bill also fails to address fundamental challenges of digital assets related to uncontrolled anonymity of self-hosted digital wallets that I believe must be addressed for the digital asset industry to accede to a healthy and sustainable future over the long term. For example, to be regulated as a commodity under this bill, no person or group can have owned more than 20% of the assets at any point over the preceding 12 months. How can this possibly be guaranteed when unknown fractions of ownership are held in anonymous self-hosted wallets? This bill requires the SEC to issue beneficial ownership disclosure rules. However, the SEC has little or no means of compelling individuals or firms in other countries to comply with such a requirement. This beneficial ownership test could be skewed by non-compliant foreign owners, or by individuals spreading their holdings across multiple wallets, or by dead or lost crypto that artificially inflates the amount of the asset that's currently judged to be in circulation. And the list goes on. This legislation actually ties the hands of the top financial crimes watchdog, the FinCEN, limiting their ability to respond to issues related to self-custody of digital wallets, which they will tell you is the main issue that they struggle with every day in trying to prevent financial crimes. So, given the widespread use of digital assets by bad actors, we should strengthen the authorities of FinCEN and not weaken them. My colleagues and I, as I said, offered several constructive amendments to this bill to clarify and address these issues, and the Rules Committee, controlled by the majority, unfortunately chose to exclude every one of them from today's debate. So given the content of this bill and its failure to address these issues, I cannot support this bill, and I encourage my colleagues to vote no. Thank you, and yield back.
The gentleman from California yields. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Minnesota, a great leader for digital assets, cryptocurrency, and innovation, Tom Emmer.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, we have an opportunity to determine whether the next iteration of the Internet will be designed by Americans or if it will instead reflect the values of some other nation. The FIT21 Act gives us that opportunity and unlocks a larger conversation beyond innovation. This bill is about national security. It's about consumer protection. It's about global competitiveness. It's about shaping what the future global digital economy looks like and how it functions. Currently, all online transactions are intermediated. But as we move deeper into the digital age, digital assets are key to decentralizing the internet so Americans can transact directly with each other. Now, no intermediary needed. Without crypto, we don't have this ability. And I think giving Americans the choice to do business through an intermediary or directly with each other is important. Having that choice will fundamentally alter the digital economy, unlocking new opportunities for Americans and individuals across the world in ways we haven't even begun to contemplate. However, this Congress can no longer stand by as regulators squander this opportunity right within our grasp. This administration has demonstrated they simply are not willing to allow the digital asset industry to innovate in the United States. For every legal inconsistency or regulatory hurdle they produce, instead of coherent and informed guidance, they drive American digital asset users into less safe jurisdictions. That's why the FIT21 Act is significant, to set clear and consistent rules for American innovators. Among the many important provisions in this bill is My Securities Clarity Act, bipartisan language tailored specifically to digital assets that provides the legal flexibility for a digital asset project to transition from centralization to decentralization. This transition is critical to the future peer-to-peer digital economy, and I thank the chairman and my friends on the other side of the aisle for working with me to incorporate this section into the bill today. Their work on this extensive framework will allow Americans to once again lead the way. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves.
My time.
The gentlelady reserves.
Thank you.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
May I inquire of the time remaining on both sides?
The gentleman from North Carolina has 16 minutes remaining.
I yield. And how much time?
The gentlewoman from California has 4 minutes. The gentleman is recognized.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Colorado, who's been a fantastic leader on the Agriculture Committee on Digital Assets, Ms. Caraveo.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. McHenry, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise today in support of H.R. 4763, the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act, because the time has come for us to establish a comprehensive regulatory system for digital assets. About 70% of digital assets are currently unregulated. That leaves a large number of retail investors unprotected in a volatile market where many people have already lost their life savings. There is clearly a gap in oversight over our digital asset cash markets, and I believe the status quo is unacceptable. Despite previous volatility, a significant number of Americans continue to own and invest in digital markets in an unprotected manner. As Congress falls behind other nations in a race to establish a clear regulatory framework, we run the risk of industry players taking their services and customers abroad, including to foreign jurisdictions with insufficient regulations. Since we began this process over a year ago, I made it a point to work across the aisle with Chairs Thompson and Johnson to improve the bill as much as possible. I am happy to report that the bill retains many of the provisions that I fought for, with one of the most important pieces being a funding mechanism for the CFTC. Increased funding will be vital for the CFTC as they take on further oversight activities and engage in a rulemaking process. I would like to thank my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, who have helped strengthen the consumer protections in this bill, including strengthening disclosure requirements, market integrity, and transparency, stricter regulatory requirements for emerging financial technologies, prohibiting commingling of customer funds with firm funds, and establishing a process of temporary oversight before rulemaking is complete. I am excited about the innovation these technologies have to offer, which is why I believe they deserve a comprehensive regulatory environment. But making sure customers and retail investors are protected as they navigate the space remains a top priority. I believe we have made significant improvements in that direction. I am looking forward to continuing to move this bill forward, taking a first real step to regulate a market.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
And I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from California reserves.
Mr. Chairman, the gentlelady from California has indeed been a great advocate for consumer protection. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Godheimer.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the Bipartisan Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act. The well-reasoned, thoughtful, bipartisan legislation is a result of rigorous research and bipartisan negotiation by the Financial Services Committee, which I proudly helped lead with Representatives McHenry and Hill, and I want to thank them both and all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who worked so hard to make sure that consumers in our country are protected. Cryptocurrency is here, and it has a tremendous economic potential for our country. My state, New Jersey, ranks second nationwide in crypto ownership by proportion, and the key is now making sure we protect Americans who own it and ensure our country can realize the economic and jobs potential it has to offer. For that to happen, we need rules of the road to guide entrepreneurs and businesses and embrace innovators and protect consumers. This bill offers protections that are fit for the 21st century. Fit 21 takes common sense steps to safeguard consumer and in their investments and strengthen market oversight. The legislation includes key transparency and accountability measures. And at the same time, Fit 21 eliminates regulatory redundancies. Would you consider yielding me 30 more seconds?
I yield the gentleman 30 more seconds.
Thank you. So at the same time, Fit 21 eliminates regulatory redundancy, so the SEC and CFTC work together to protect investors and crack down on nefarious crypto users. Finally, this legislation spurs American-led innovation, encouraging entrepreneurs and businesses to invest here instead of going abroad to other nations with no consumer protections. I urge my colleagues to support this important, innovative, and bipartisan legislation. It's fit to become law if we work together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
We'll now recognize for 1 minute the gentleman from New York, leader on the Agriculture Committee, Mr. Molinaro.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For far too long, the U.S. digital asset ecosystem has been plagued by regulatory uncertainty. Consumers, yes, have fallen victim to scams, hacks, market manipulation, and bankruptcies after intermediaries misused customer funds and were unable to meet their obligations. Thanks to the leadership of Chairman McHenry and Thompson, Representatives Dusty Johnson and French Hill, we finally have a framework, thanks to the work of many, before us today that will set a regulatory foundation to protect consumers and innovators alike, all the while ensuring future American leadership in this space. This bipartisan bill does, in fact, provide consumer protections and a functional regulatory framework that will ensure the digital asset ecosystem is safe for investors. This bill accomplishes this by delivering the transparency consumers expect and need to make informed decisions and prevent brokers from engaging in manipulative practices that harm American investors. This regulatory certainty will also drive financial inclusion by promoting technology that can foster economic growth in underserved communities and expand opportunities for economic participation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield my time and encourage my colleagues to support the bill.
The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I continue to reserve my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I'll now yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson, who is the vice chair of the Digital Assets Subcommittee and an OG, as they say, in the crypto space.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank the chairman. I rise in strong support of this long overdue legislation. It builds on the framework that my colleagues and I have worked on for at least 6 years, beginning with the Token Taxonomy Act in 2018. Its core is a bright line test to define what digital assets are securities regulated by the SEC and which are commodities under the jurisdiction of the CFTC. Innovators and investors will no longer risk their freedom and their fortunes by simply launching a company and raising capital. The law will be clear and regulation by selective enforcement must end. Additionally, and perhaps most notably, this bill also provides first ever federal level protection for self-custody of digital assets. This protection, which is very intentional, mirrors my Keep Your Coins Act, and it's a giant step towards restoring the right to privacy and private property, protecting permissionless transactions using digital assets. In an account-based financial system where Americans must rely on intermediaries, self-custody provides the only protection against third parties controlling the individual's transactions. Further, self-custody provides the first line of consumer protection where individuals can eliminate third-party liabilities who hold their assets. For too long, we have pushed innovation and investment in digital asset projects overseas as Congress has constantly failed to bring the clarity that we need. We finally have the chance to end this trend and solidify ourselves as the leaders in this industry. I urge the Senate to quickly take up this bipartisan legislation and send it back to the President's desk as soon as possible. Please vote yes. I yield back.
The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent to submit the following statements for the record. The statement of administration policy from the Biden administration opposing this bill. The statement from SEC Chair Gensler raising serious concerns about this bill. A letter from the Treasury Department to me dated July 2023. Expressing serious concerns about this bill. A letter from that North American Securities Administration Association opposing this bill. A letter from 48 stakeholders opposing this bill. An excerpt from Coinbase's Form S-1 filing acknowledging the risk that Coinbase could be found to be illegally acting outside of securities laws. Excerpts from the SEC's complaint against Coinbase alleging that Coinbase was illegally acting outside of securities laws, and a summary of and key excerpt from the decision in the case of SEC versus Coinbase, finding that Coinbase was indeed acting illegally by failing to comply with existing laws. I reserve the balance of my time.
Without objection. Gentlewoman's request is covered by general leave. The gentlewoman reserved. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I now recognize for 1 minute the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My home state of Kansas is a leader when it comes to agriculture innovation. A lesson that I've learned from Kansans is that we must be ready to respond to new technological developments as they come to life. Digital asset markets are no exception. As these markets have grown, they have lacked congressional guidance over who has regulatory and enforcement authority over them. Currently, participants are at the mercy of regulators who continue to assert jurisdiction and extend their authority through enforcement actions, all without legislation or direction from Congress. I urge my colleagues to support this bill to establish a framework consistent with existing financial market requirements while acknowledging the uniqueness of digital assets. We can and should give consumers, developers, and institutions a clear set of rules that provide certainty as they explore this new innovative technology. Digital assets and related blockchain technology have the potential to lead us to the next generation of internet technology. Everyone here should want America to be a place where this flourishes, and that is what Fit 21 does. It allows America to build on this potential. If we do not act now, we cede American leadership, talent, and innovation. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on Fit 21, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Continue to reserve the balance
The
of my
gentlewoman
time.
from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I'll now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Flood, a great legislator in the digital asset and innovation space.
The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to focus on one particular aspect of this bill. It is responsive exactly to the problems in the digital assets market that we've seen over the last couple of years. In the aftermath of the collapse of FTX in 2022, we need to ensure that there are investor protection rules that prevent anything from happening like that again in the United States. Under the regulatory structure created by this bill, FTX would not have been able to register. FTX would not have been able to commingle customer funds that hurt so many of their investors. Some of my friends on the other side of the aisle have spoken about protecting investors. The great irony is that they are opposing a bill that would do just that. If you believe in investor protection, if you believe we need to respond to the disaster of FTX, then we need to pass a bill that would prevent the next FTX. The status quo will not work. It did not work in 2022, and it will not work today. With that, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves.
Continue to
California
reserve
is
the balance
recognized.
of my time. Do they have? I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from California reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I'm going to now recognize for 1 minute the gentleman from Tennessee, Great leader on the Agriculture and Financial Services Committee, Mr. Rose.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 4763, the Financial Innovation and Technology, or FIT, for the 21st Century Act. As a member of the House Financial Services and Agriculture Committees, I am proud to support this bill, and its product is a joint effort between both committees. I commend both Chairman McHenry and Chairman Thompson for working on this bipartisan legislation. This bill confronts the litigation-heavy approach towards digital assets of the Securities and Exchange Commission, led by rogue regulator Gary Gensler. Chair Gensler has blown past the SEC's statutory mandate and instead forced investors and companies to operate in the dark, thus risking the United States standing as a world leader in digital innovation. The Fit for the 21st Century Act will allow the U.S. to reclaim our place as a world leader in innovation and provides clear rules of the road for cryptocurrencies. I urge members to join me in voting yes.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Continue to reserve the balance
Gentlelady
of
from
my
California
time.
reserves. Gentleman from
May I
North
inquire
Carolina.
how much time is remaining?
7 minutes remaining. Gentlelady from California has 4 minutes remaining.
I'll now recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, a leader on the Agriculture Committee, former chair of the Agriculture Committee, and a great leader on the Financial Services Committee. Also chair of the Science Committee, before I forget. Frank will yield you 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The United States has no meaningful federal regulation of the digital assets markets, and the attempts by regulators to apply existing laws are arbitrary and unclear. The fact is, the status quo does not work. Without a clear federal framework, we fail to provide adequate consumer protections and forfeit our international competitiveness. This hurts U.S. consumers, investors, and the entire economy. This is why this bill is so important. The legislation establishes a market structure framework that accounts for the unique characteristics of digital assets, adhering to the core principles of the Commodities Exchange Act. U.S. consumers are actively participating in the digital asset market, and we should ensure they are protected from fraud and scams. This bill does that. I'd like to thank Chairman McHenry and Chairman Thompson for all their work on this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from California reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
We'll now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Huizinga, who is the chair of the Oversight Subcommittee on the House Financial Services Committee. Yield 1 minute. 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman McHenry. And Mr. Speaker, since First Cryptocurrency Network was created nearly 15 years ago, the rules governing the digital asset ecosystem have remained unclear. As I learned while serving as chairman of the Capital Markets Committee, regulators have been using opaque guidelines and regulation by enforcement. Meanwhile, Congress has been working on a bipartisan path forward. Digital assets have the potential to revolutionize payment systems in the United States by allowing financial systems to become more efficient and more accessible to consumers. By passing a comprehensive market structure framework, responsible actors will now have greater certainty, and consumers will have greater protection from bad actors. Mr. Speaker, our markets are the envy of the world. We must not cede any ground. American innovation is a critical element of job creation and economic opportunity here in the United States. Congress must look to preserve this competitive advantage and not let it leave our shores. The FIT 21 Act is a historic first step, and I urge all of my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentlelady from California.
I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Does the gentlelady have any additional speakers?
Yes, no more speakers. If the gentleman has no more speakers, I'm prepared to close.
All right. I now recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Kim, for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman McHenry. Millions of Americans from all backgrounds see digital assets as one of the many options to take wealth creation into their own hands. Unfortunately, U.S. is falling behind compared to other countries, and we have yet to establish a viable regulatory framework for digital assets. H.R. 4763 established a much-needed digital asset market structure framework that provides clear rules for digital asset firms while providing robust consumer protections. Thus, I believe this bill is very fit for the 21st century. The FIT 21 Act would enable innovation to flourish and the United States to lead the world in the development of digital assets. The EU, the UK, Hong Kong, and the list goes on, have established or are in the process of establishing a regulatory framework. The development of technologies and new financial services tools should be taking place here, not elsewhere. I urge a yes vote on H.R. 4763, and with that, I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentlelady from California continues to reserve. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I now yield to the Chair of the House Administration Committee and a great member of the Financial Services Committee and Innovation Policy, Mr. Stile, for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the FIT 21 Act. Blockchain and digital assets are transforming finance and reshaping, in particular, the way the internet works. But responsible innovators are being held back by stubborn Washington bureaucrats. It's pushing jobs and opportunities overseas. For the first time in generations, the U.S. is at risk of missing out on leading the next wave of technology. FIT 21 provides clear rules for digital assets and related businesses. It protects consumers and strengthens transparency and accountability. And it reestablishes the United States as a technology leader. I urge my colleagues to support the bill and bring jobs and opportunities and innovation in digital assets to the United States. I yield back.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentlelady from California continues to reserve.
Continue to reserve the balance of my time.
And the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I'll now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Curtis.
Gentleman is recognized.
I rise in favor of the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act, which establishes much-needed regulatory framework for digital assets. Currently, the lack of clear direction from Congress, combined with the broad definitions of securities and commodities, has allowed the SEC to insert itself into the regulation of cryptocurrency. This has created uncertainty and hindered innovation. Meanwhile, other countries like Singapore, UAE, and even China have capitalized on our unclear regulatory environment. They've developed their own framework, positioning themselves as hubs for the digital asset ecosystem. I believe the United States, and particularly Utah's Silicon Slopes, which boast a growing and thriving blockchain industry, should be the global center for digital assets. This bill creates an appropriate framework for cryptocurrency regulation that fosters innovation and ensures U.S. leadership in blockchain technology, while also protecting against bad actors like FTX. The FIT for the 21st Century Act realigns the SEC with its appropriate regulatory role and designates the Commodity Future Trading Commission as the primary regulatory of cryptocurrency as a commodity. It also clarifies the SEC's roles in regulating digital assets. With that, I yield my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Continue to reserve the balance of my time.
And I'm, Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to close, and I reserve.
Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I yield myself the balance of the time.
He's recognized.
Yes, as we have heard today, the entities that stand to benefit from this bill are not ordinary investors trying to build wealth, but rather the crypto firms that have chosen to register with the SEC or otherwise comply with the security laws. They have already made billions of dollars unlawfully issuing or facilitating the buying and selling of crypto securities. And Republicans are now proposing to reward these illegal activities by making these activities legal. This is truly preposterous. You know, Mr. Lynch, when he spoke, He said this was one of the worst pieces of legislation he has experienced through his entire career. And I understand why. When I examine this bill and I see that the Republicans had created this new definition. And this new definition is known as the investment contract assets. Now, we've talked about this, but, even in the Rules Committee, while they were, talking about how this bill was going to protect consumers, they did not debate us about this investment contract asset because they know that it created a void. It created a no man's land. This was created basically so that the crypto companies could be in a space without regulation. But it goes further than that. It also covers traditional securities so they can be in a space without regulation. It is not enough to say this is a bad bill. This is not only a bad bill, this is a bill where the crypto companies decided they didn't like the SEC, they do not want to be regulated, and they were going to come to the Congress of the United States, and they were going to use their power, and they were going to use their influence to change the rules of the game, and that they were going to now go to where the commodities are regulated, and they're going to take the securities over there. I explained to you that the CFTC is a small agency. I explained to you that they don't have a lot of money. I explained to you how much smaller they are than the SEC. The SEC are the experts. It is 90 years old in the development of regulations for this country. And it is 90 years old, and it is respected all over the world. We're the envy of the world because we have an SEC. And so, when I talk about this void that has been created, there is no way that the members of this Congress can allow that to happen, to allow this no man's land to exist where the same crypto companies that are now refusing to register, who are unlawful, that you're going to exonerate, and then you're going to further give them the opportunity to operate without regulation. This is unbelievable. How can this happen in the Congress of the United States, in the House of Representatives, where we are supposed to represent the people? We have an SEC that is the cop on the block. We have an SEC that is expert in securities. This SEC goes into the courts and they fight tough battles. These battles are long. These battles are hard because they're fought by the crypto companies. But they don't give up because at least they have people who can begin to work on it. We try to give them more money to do their work, but they are denied additional appropriations by the opposite of the aisle.
Gentlelady's time's expired.
And I ask the chair, how much time do I have remaining?
2 minutes remaining.
Pardon me?
2 minutes.
Chair, urge a no vote.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Let me speak to this. The void is a lack of a definition of what is a digital asset in federal law. We have none. This bill established it. We have no consumer protections for crypto today. This bill establishes it, both at the CFTC with a robust oversight of this industry and the SEC with real clarity. That's what this bill does, is provide clarity for investors and consumers and innovators. We are falling behind Europe. This bill catches up so that we do not lose out on innovation policy to the Europeans, to the folks in the UK, to Singapore, to Japan, to Hong Kong, that all have regimes similar to what we're doing in this bill. This is an important bill. It's bipartisan work. Hundreds of hours have been put into developing this with members and staff. And I want to thank the great partnership that I've had with French Hill on the Financial Services Committee and Chairman G.T. Thompson on the Ag Committee and Dusty Johnson on the Ag Committee. But I also want to thank the great staff on the House Financial Services Committee, Allison Behuniak, who has shepherded this bill to this point, and Paul Balzano on the Ag Committee. They have worked in great partnership, in friendship, and worked through major issues. And I want to thank them for this important legislative product. We can promote American innovation, consumer protection, and leadership with a clear regulatory framework for digital assets. The next generation of internet technology is being written. It should be written by American innovators here in the United States. We can allow that innovation to pass us by, or we can seize the opportunity and pass this bill to provide real clarity for innovation policy here in the United States. Regulatory clarity and consumer protection, that is FIT 21. Let's vote yes on this bill and establish bipartisan support for crypto in America. And I yield back.
All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill should be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendments in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Agriculture and Financial Services, print of the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 118-33, modified by the amendment printed in House Part A of House Report 118-516, shall be considered as adopted. The bill, as amended, shall be considered as the original bill for purpose of further amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered as read. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order, except those printed in Part B of House Report 118-516. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, shall be debatable for a time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 118-516. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk made in order by the rule.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-516, offered by Mr. Kassar of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1243, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Kassar, and a member for opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you. I yield myself as much time as I may use.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chair, from 2017 to 2022, Americans who invested in the SSP index received about a 61% return on their investment. But Americans who invested in one of the top 12 cryptocurrencies that existed during that 5-year period did not make money. On the other hand, on average, they lost about half of their money. 3 out of every 4 Bitcoin traders during that time period also lost money. From FTX to Celsius to blockchain ATMs, the industry has repeatedly lost everyday Americans their money. So whether you are a crypto booster or a crypto skeptic, we can all agree, based on the facts, that crypto investment is a risk. And since it is a risk, we should want more oversight to protect Americans. But this bill before us today doesn't provide us more regulation. It doesn't even provide many Americans the same level of regulation as traditional finance. Instead, it creates a light-touch regulatory regime that can be manipulated by bad actors in both crypto and traditional finance, putting Americans and our 90-year securities laws at risk. My amendment focuses on one key area where everyday people who would invest in crypto under this bill will in fact receive less protection than Americans invested in traditional finance. The current flawed bill before us creates a crowdfunding registration exemption for crypto that is 15 times weaker than the crowdfunding exemption that exists in traditional finance. In the existing bill before us, someone could crowdfund up to $75 million from everyday Americans, and those Americans would receive just the most minimal of protections. We would never allow that in the non-crypto finance world. So my amendment changes the exemption cap to $5 million, putting that cap in line with our current laws. So at the very least, Americans making investments in crypto can get the same level of protection as crowdfunding investors in traditional finance. I hope that whether you are for the underlying bill or against the underlying bill like me, we can agree that this common sense amendment will help protect everyday people, and I urge everyone to support it. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. Does the gentleman from North Carolina
I rise in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized.
And I'm opposed to the amendment. Look, today, digital asset issuers rely on exemptions under the current securities regime. And each exemption includes its own requirements under traditional securities law. What we provide in this act is purpose-built for digital assets. And what this does today, if you're raising money for a digital asset offering, the exemption is built for those other types of securities in the space. The SEC's disclosure regime is supposed to give investors the information they need to make informed decisions, but it's not built for digital assets. What we do in this act is provide certain disclosures for investors in digital assets, such as source code, token supply, governance mechanisms, and other aspects unique to crypto. That's what this bill does. What the gentleman from is rising to do is limit that aperture from $75 million to $5 million of those folks that can invest in these early stage innovations. What he's doing is restricting the opportunity for average everyday investors to get options like high wealth investors get today under securities law. The original exemption for regulation crowdfunding was something we put in law and with bipartisan support. With Maxine Waters is my co-sponsor on regulation crowdfunding. This very exemption. I've enhanced this. I put additional requirements here to make sure there are more disclosures, and we open up the aperture to $75 million so more folks can participate and so those blockchains can develop. When you make it to $5 million, it makes it impossible for you to actually scale up, especially with these inflationary times that our people are facing. So what I would urge is the House reject this amendment. The gentleman's arguments against this exemption have nothing to do with the exemption, but have everything to do with opposition to the bill. And I urge a no vote, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlewoman from California, Ranking Member Waters.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Texas for attempting this amendment. As a matter of fact, there have been any number of members from this side of the aisle who've been attempting to amend this bill to try and make it better. And while I have great respect for all of those attempts, and if they had listened, if they had accepted, perhaps they could have made this a better bill. But at this point in time, no. Unfortunately, with all the work that this gentleman had done, Mr. Kassar and others, they will not accept any amendments. They're not going to accept his amendment. They don't think that the bill can be made better. And unfortunately, the bill is so bad, I don't think it can be made better either. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I'm prepared to close, and I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I'm prepared to close and yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Our securities laws were created after the Great Depression, when this country understood that strong regulation protects Americans and is necessary for innovation and for our economy to thrive. We cannot hold cryptocurrency to a lower standard than traditional finance. And my amendment ensures that when it comes to crowdfunding, cryptocurrency is held to the same standard, and I urge all to support it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
If I may inquire of the chair, the time I have remaining.
Gentleman has 3 minutes.
Well, thank you. Let me close with this, Mr. Chairman. We have this push and pull in the Financial Services Committee. And generally speaking, we have elected officials that say the American people's hard-earned savings are their hard-earned savings. But then we have paternalistic amendments like the one before us today that says, no, you're not smart enough to invest your own money. We have to put in these safeguards to protect you from yourself. I think that goes way too far. What we've done with securities laws is take average, everyday investors and disintermediate them from the greater economy. So average, everyday Americans don't get the benefit of economic growth, of Wall Street doing great, and earnings going up in corporate America. We've separated it because we made it harder for average, everyday folks to invest in companies, have ownership of companies. What we're trying to do is open that up a little bit. From $5 million of an exemption when you're raising money to $75 million. In the scope of our economy, in the scope of our capital markets, in the scope of economic opportunity and innovation, that is a very small aperture we're opening here. And we've done that. We've constructed this provision with a lot of Democrat input and Republican input, and that's how we came to the number of $75 million. It is already a compromise. But what the gentleman offers with this amendment is nothing more than saying, I'm paternalistic, and I'm therefore going to restrict your opportunity to invest your money as you see fit. Reject the amendment, vote no, and vote yes on final passage for FIT 21. I yield back.
Gentleman from North Carolina yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Chairman.
Amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
Does the gentleman from Texas rise?
I'd like to request a recorded vote, Mr. Speaker.
Pursuant to Clause 6, Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 118-516. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Colorado seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-516, offered by Ms. Pedersen of Colorado.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1243, the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Pedersen, and a member of opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
More than 20% of Americans have owned or traded cryptocurrency. Despite this, the U.S. still lacks a clear regulatory structure for digital assets, which is hurting American competitiveness and incentivizing some companies, unfortunately, to move overseas. While there may be disagreement about how to best establish the appropriate market regulatory structure, there is broad bipartisan agreement for preventing criminals from using cryptocurrencies for illicit purposes, such as money laundering, terrorist financing, and sanction evasion. My amendment would provide clarity and conformity to how the Bank Secrecy Act and regulations safeguarding our financial system from criminals are applied to digital assets. The base bill already calls for the Bank Secrecy Act to apply to digital assets. However, by amending the BSA directly and explicitly, expanding the definition of financial institution in the BSA to cover digital asset entities, we are providing certainty to the regulators and the Department of Treasury in their authorities to protect our financial system. Additionally, the amendment would also require a study to assess the risks posed by centralized intermediaries based in jurisdictions that lack robust anti-money laundering enforcement. While in most cases, American digital asset companies are already complying with the applicable requirements under the Bank Secrecy Act, we also have to be thinking about the threat of foreign companies with U.S. touchpoints that are not complying with equivalent controls or reporting standards. I would like to thank the Chairman, McHenry, and Representative Hill for working with me on this issue and their commitment to strengthening the anti-money laundering provisions in this bill. This amendment combined with the underlying bill will help provide more oversight into the digital asset market and support regulators' work to protect consumers and investors. While there is more work to be done to ensure the integrity of our digital assets market, this amendment is an important step forward, and I urge my colleagues to support the adoption of the amendment and the underlying bill. I reserve the balance of my time.
From Colorado reserves, gentleman.
Ask unanimous consent to claim the time in opposition, though I'm not opposed to the amendment. Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to accept this amendment. I think it's important we have a comprehensive regulatory framework for digital asset markets, yes. We also have to ensure that we have a consistent application of the Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering provisions in existing law. Requirements on the digital asset intermediaries and exchanges are necessary so that bad actors don't exploit these markets for nefarious purposes. I want to thank the gentlewoman from Colorado for her work on this amendment. She's been focused on AML, BSA-related issues in the build-up to us writing FIT 21 during the markup process in the Rules Committee, as well as the process, the process in the Financial Services Committee, then the process through the Rules Committee. And I appreciate her sincere engagement on this matter and for coming up with a very good amendment. I urge support of this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentlelady from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm prepared to close, and I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I want to again thank the chairman from North Carolina for working with me and others to make sure that you are able to bring a bipartisan bill with broad support to the House. I know that this has been years in the making, and congratulations for getting it to this point, and I appreciate your willingness to work with me. I also want to thank my team for helping me address an issue that I have concerns about, and with that, I ask for your support. And is that the last thing? I guess that's the last thing I'm supposed to say.
Gentlelady from Colorado yields. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I'll now recognize the chair of the Digital Asset Subcommittee on the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Hill, for as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank Chairman McHenry. I thank the chair for the time. I want to congratulate the gentlewoman from Colorado on this very effective amendment, because she shares that passion that we've all had through this entire process, which is to recognize that we need to have vigorous anti-money laundering, Bank Secrecy Act, and know your customer protections around digital finance, just like we do in the analog financial services system. Her bill will strengthen that. I just was reviewing the Treasury Department's 2024 National Security for Combating Terrorist and Other Illicit Financing, and it brings to mind what a better regime it is to have blockchain. Because a blockchain, Mr. Speaker, has the identity connected with the transaction. It leaves an ineligible mark cryptographically of those transaction amounts, makes illicit finance easier to identify, not less. Treasury points out that the top abusers, the top concern about illicit finance are misuse of cash, including bulk cash, misuse of financial products and services like money orders, easy formation and limited information required to create a legal entity, the use of casinos. That's what the Treasury Department says are the toughest, most challenging aspects of terror finance. And that's why this study will help us make sure that using blockchain is a more effective way to counter illicit finance in the world. So I thank the gentlewoman from Colorado for her support and for being such a constructive source of dynamic support for crafting FIT 21. And I yield back the balance of the time.
North Carolina is recognized.
Again, I want to echo what Congressman Hill just stated for the record. The gentlelady from Colorado has been a sterling advocate for enhanced BSA AML protections and ensuring we get against that we work against illicit finance. And I want to thank her for the efforts, and I'm willing to accept the amendment and urge its adoption. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 3, printed in Part B of House Report 118-516. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-516, offered by Mr. Norman of South Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1243, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My amendment is pretty simple. It requires the Treasury Secretary, in consultation with the CFTC and the SEC, to complete a study and submit a report to Congress that identifies any digital asset registrants that are owned by governments of foreign adversaries. The report will determine whether foreign adversary governments are collecting or trading personal data about American citizens in the digital asset markets and evaluate whether foreign adversary governments are misusing or stealing any proprietary intellectual property of digital asset registrants. The GAO is required to complete a study and submit a report to Congress on the very same issues. This amendment would promote transparency regarding how our nation's strategic enemies may be exploiting the digital asset marketplace to invade the privacy of Americans and steal valuable intellectual property. In June of 2023, the financial services hearings that focused on the very bill that we are considering today, Aaron Kaplan, the CEO of Prometheum, the first and only SEC FINRA-approved special purpose broker-dealer for digital assets, stated that Prometheum and its CCP partners entered into a joint agreement in December of 2018 to develop a blockchain trading system where the Chinese partner took a 20% stake in Prometheum. In case anyone has any doubts about the CCP ties, Prometheum's Chinese partner's company was founded in 1969 by a former senior CCP official. In 2021, the party's Central Committee named a National Excellent Communist Party member. In July of 2023, several of my colleagues and I sent a letter to the SEC and the DOJ expressing our concerns with inconsistencies in Prometheum's public filings and the CCP's ownership of an entity that had the blessing of the SEC and FINRA to operate in the United States. I followed up on this letter in September 2023 hearing with the SEC's Gary Gensler, where he dodged my question and did not take my concerns of the 20% CCP ownership of Prometheum seriously. The fact of the matter is that because Chinese companies are genuinely required by Chinese law to share data with the Chinese government, these companies present substantial risk to the United States' individual privacy and our national security. Chinese-owned broker-dealers like Prometheum, Webull, and Moomoo operate as registered entities here in the United States, and the Biden administration and Chad Gensler do not seem to care. Yet they attack American businesses operating in good faith with no regulatory clarity. This is simply how the CCP and other foreign adversaries operate. They infiltrate our markets while the Biden administration looks the other way and punishes American companies who are only trying to operate in the United States but face endless regulations by enforcement of the Biden administration. We need to pass FIT 21 into law because the SEC's current regulation by enforcement is putting the United States at a disadvantage and allowing foreign adversaries to gain an advantage in our U.S. crypto markets, all the while Gary Gensler attacks American public companies who have tried to work with the SEC and come in and register. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment to protect Americans from having their personal data shared with the CCP and other foreign adversaries. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from South Carolina reserves the balance of time. For purposes, the gentlelady from California seek recognition.
To claim time in opposition, although I'm not opposed. While I do not oppose this amendment, I would like to emphasize that the broad deregulatory nature of the Not Fit for Purpose Act is such that it would severely weaken our capital markets and make us more vulnerable to bad actors, both domestic and foreign. This amendment and the underlying bill do not protect consumers and investors. This amendment only requires a study on whether or not foreign adversaries are operating as digital asset registrants under the bill and collecting data on the U.S. consumer or investors. We should not just be studying this issue. We should be legislating strong data privacy protections that apply all across the board. Moreover, if TikTok was the inspiration for this bill, I would like to note that TikTok is not directly owned by the Chinese government. The concern was that it was vulnerable to being unduly influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. So if a China-based company was operating as a digital asset registrant under this bill, it would not fall within this study unless it was directly owned by Chinese Communist Party. It would be easy for our adversaries to simply stand up proxy companies that appear to have no direct affiliation with them to evade the scrutiny of the study in the bill. So while I plan to support this amendment, I don't think it provides any meaningful safeguards on consumer privacy, and it certainly does nothing to fix the underlying problems of the Not Fit for Purpose Act. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from California reserves. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Speaker, how much time do I have?
45 seconds.
I yield the balance of the 45 seconds to Congressman Hill.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from South Carolina. I rise in support of his amendment. It allows me to illustrate two things. One, that Prometheum, while it was approved as a special purpose broker-dealer for digital assets, has not accomplished anything. It has no business. And yet it also has this partnership with the CCP. So there's an illustration that Fit 21 would allow us to have the guidance on how to register a broker-dealer. And secondly, I support fully Mr. Norman and his concerns about the influence of foreign adversaries on people registered in the United States. It's a clear issue, and we have an investigation going on why the SEC has not pursued this itself. So I rise in support of the amendment. I support Mr. Norman's effort. It's a good amendment. Let's add it to the bill and pass Fit 21. Yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
The bill's supporters have claimed that this bill is necessary to provide legal clarity as to when a digital asset is considered a security and when it is considered a commodity. But this bill is anything but clear. It is 253 pages of highly convoluted and poorly defined language. At the Rules Committee hearing yesterday, the Republicans testifying on the panel in defense of the bill could not answer a simple question from a fellow Republican as to whether Dogecoin would qualify as a security or commodity under this bill. They pointed to their 5-point decentralization test in the bill, which is again anything but clear. The current test for determining whether something is a security is called the Howey test. It has stood the test of time with guidance from the SEC clarifying its application, in addition to decades of case law expounding on how it applies to a variety of different assets. Even the courts have agreed with SEC's interpretation of the Howey test, classifying digital assets as securities in a strikingly consistent manner. The 5-part decentralization test in this bill has not been tested, and it would create a slew of new litigation trying to decipher how it applies. And so, instead of a study, we should remember that the fact that members of Congress and legal experts are struggling to agree on basic facts about what this bill would do just foreshadows the mountains of litigation that this bill would result in to figure that out. This bill provides the opposite of legal clarity, as the bill's supporters claim. Instead, it provides several more convoluted and untested definitions to replace the time-tested Howey test in place today. The only thing clear about this 253-page bill is that it results in the substantial deregulation of crypto, just as the crypto industry has asked for. I reserve the balance of my time.
Time's expired.
I will yield 1 minute to Mr. Sherman.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
This amendment gives the illusion that it prevents the bill from being useful to our foreign adversaries, when in fact we see Iran using crypto to avoid sanctions, North Korea profiting from crypto. We see Hamas raising huge amounts of money and being able to sneak around our efforts by using crypto. And finally, we see the crypto advocates viewing this bill as their ticket to move crypto into a competitor with the U.S. dollar. And then finally, with tomorrow's bill, they try to hobble the dollar by saying it can't be digital and we can't have a better payment system involving the dollar, and that's their system for having crypto outcompete the dollar. The administration opposes this bill, and even if you looked at it a few weeks ago, it's gotten much, much worse. I want to reemphasize, they added a new title that allows crypto to be completely unregulated and would allow for non-regulation of our stocks and bonds. So even if you like this bill when you saw it 3 weeks ago, vote no.
The gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment.
Vote is requested.
Pursuant to Clause 6, Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 4, printed in Part B of House Report 118-516. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-516, offered by Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania.
Resolution 1243, gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, and a member opposed. Each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer a simple but important amendment. While the underlying legislation allows the Commodities Future Trading Commission the authority to regulate digital asset spot markets, nothing in the bill should be construed as giving the CFTC power beyond digital assets. We all have seen good intentions around here, and nothing is punished like good intentions around here. So let's just make clear what the strike zone is for everybody. We're trying to define that strike zone. This amendment adds a sense of Congress that nothing in this act or any amendment made by this act should be interpreted by, to authorize any entity to regulate any commodity other than a digital commodity on any spot market. That's it. That's the whole thing. Again, this amendment simply aims to combat mission creep, if you want to call it that, somewhere outside the strike zone, and makes clear that Congress's intent is to only address digital asset spot markets in this bill and no more. So the courts won't have any questions. Mr. Gensler can't say, well, I'm not sure they did this, or they surely must have meant that. No, we cannot allow these agencies to take more and more power in the absence of express congressional approval. We've already seen Mr. Gensler aggressively pursue litigation against the crypto industry, people trying to do it the right way. While trying to rein him in, we ought to ensure the CFTC knows exactly what they can and cannot do, because he's not going to be there forever. There's going to be some next person that's going to come along and say, well, Congress wasn't really sure. We are sure, and that's what this amendment does, Madam Chair, and I reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose the gentleman from South Dakota seek recognition?
Must consent to claim time in opposition, though I am not in opposition to the amendment.
You are opposed.
I'm
Will
opposed.
suspend. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
I rise and claim in time to claim opposition.
And is recognized.
Under H.R. 4763, crypto that is deemed to be a digital commodity would come under the CFTC's purview, which would include a new explicit authority for the CFTC to regulate crypto spot markets. However, this amendment would ensure that this new authority for the CFTC to regulate crypto spot markets does not include traditional commodity spot markets. It's already bad enough that this bill would result in mass deregulation of crypto and even some traditional securities too. This amendment takes the bill to the next level by trying to preemptively block the CFTC to oversee non-crypto spot markets. The bill's supporters continue to insist that this bill is only about crypto, but it has serious implications for traditional securities. And with this amendment, would now appear to have serious implications for traditional commodities also. It is wholly unclear while Republicans who have placed so much faith in CFTC to police the spot markets of digital commodities think that this agency is unable to oversee the spot markets of everyday commodities they currently regulate, like oil, wheat, and livestock. Excessive speculation in spot markets of tangible commodities is a real problem that can harm working families' budgets. For this reason, Democratic CFTC Commissioner Christy Goldsmith Romero has called on the CFTC to study excessive and harmful speculations in the commodities markets. Specifically, she has stated, and I quote, "The CFTC has an impressive surveillance program and an equally impressive cadre of commodity markets experts to rely upon as it seeks to understand these pressures of working families, farmers, and producers. We should use them more and more publicity," unquote. I agree with her. I urge you to stand up for working families and farmers by leaving the CFTC's existing authority to protect them from speculation in the traditional securities market fully intact. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman, my friend, Representative Johnson.
Gentleman from South Dakota is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to first commend the gentleman from Pennsylvania for his thoughtful and forward-looking amendment. Now, I think it's important that we set the record straight. This amendment would not, as some have alleged, strip the CFTC of all of its spot market regulatory authority. All of the anti-fraud and anti-manipulation powers that they currently hold would remain in place. This sense of Congress simply makes it clear that within FIT 21, that those do not provide the CFTC with grand new authorities over non-digital asset spot markets. And I think it's important we do that. There are clear and important differences between the traditional spot markets for commodities. Think about people buying and selling barrels of oil. That's not something everyday Americans are doing, but we do have everyday Americans engaged in the spot market for digital assets. Also, with regard to digital asset commodities, we also have a number of intermediaries that would be interacting with these retail consumers. Some of those intermediaries would certainly hold the cash of consumers either pending or after a trade. That's an important situation that we need to protect for that is not exactly like that in the traditional commodity market. So different marketplace, different threats, different set of tools. As the chair of the Digital Assets Subcommittee, I want to make it clear I support the gentleman's amendment. I do not want any part of FIT 21 to change the CFTC's authority over non-digital asset commodities. I commend the gentleman for his work, and I urge a yes vote on the amendment. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman reserves.
Reserves.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized.
At the Rules Committee hearing, Republicans revealed their true intentions with this bill. My friend, Mr. Norman, stated regarding the investors who were defrauded by FTX, what he said was this, and I quote, "I blame the investor. I mean, would I get on an airplane with 2 wheels missing and 1 wing? They should have done their homework," end quote. Representative Austin Scott of Georgia on the Rules Committee doubled down on this kind of victim blaming, saying that he believed we should use a buyer beware approach. This is entirely offensive to consumers to simply say you should have known better than to get defrauded. The very definition of fraud implies that the consumer could not have been expected to know or understand some facet of a contract. But I would venture to say that this bill is even worse than just a buyer beware approach. This bill creates a facade of regulation that is designed to make ordinary investors and consumers think they are protected and that their investments are safe. But in reality, this bill will facilitate and legitimize fraud rather than warning consumers to beware of the risk. In addition to blaming millions of defrauded investors, Republicans continue to move forward with a bill that exempts these same crypto firms that were unlawfully issuing or facilitating crypto securities, giving them a get-out-of-jail-free card. This is what Republicans love to do. They blame consumers and investors who have been defrauded while also advancing bills to protect those same firms that are ripping off consumers and investors. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I yield the balance of my time to the gentleman, Mr. Hill.
The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for the balance of the time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for his constructive amendment. I think it's the absolute right approach. I want to associate myself with the comments from the chairman of the Digital Assets Committee for the House Ag Committee, Mr. Johnson, on that. Look, Madam Chair, colleagues, FIT 21 does exactly the opposite of what has been argued by the minority today. It gives a clear regulatory framework. It prevents fraud. It does require registration, custody, capital requirements. It gives clarity for the first time in American history to how we do securities and commodity oversight for digital assets. And the minority has also charged time and time again that somehow the great securities loophole is being offered and opened in this bill. That's just not true. It's just not a factual statement. The term investment contract is a fungible digital representation. It is not all these other items. In fact, the bill specifically says the term digital asset does not include notes, stock, treasury stocks, securities, security-based swaps, and a whole list. So it does not open the loophole that the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee charges. I urge a yes vote. I urge a yes vote for Mr. Perry's amendment. Let's have regulatory credibility and clarity for a competitive United States for the 21st century. Yield back.
Lady from California is recognized.
I yield the balance of the time to the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman.
Gentleman from California is recognized for the balance of the time.
This amendment illustrates the problem. Commodity other than a digital commodity, but any commodity can become a digital commodity. Or you can have a contract or a derivative tied to the physical commodity that now becomes a digital coin. We're told that the bill does not allow stocks and bonds to be digital assets, but it does allow them to be defined as investment contracts. And if you get defined as an investment contract, you're without regulation. As to the underlying bill, keep in mind, the administration opposes it. 3/4 of the Democrats voted against it before it got much worse. The bill got much worse a few weeks ago, so if you studied it before then, and I know the bill's been out there since July of last year, your analysis won't show you how this bill now allows digital crypto to go without regulation and opens the door to taking our traditional stocks and bonds and taking them out from the SEC. Vote no on the amendment, but especially vote no on the bill.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
A vote is requested.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
To request a recorded vote.
The yeas and nays have been pursuant to the Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on this amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 118-516, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 1 by Mr. Cesar of Texas. Amendment number 3 of Mr. Norman of South Carolina. Amendment number 4 of Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of the House Report 118-516 by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cesar, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-516, offered by Mr. Casar of Texas.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.